Hello everyone, welcome back to Rolling Solo. My name is Adam Smith, and today I'm very excited to be kicking off a Rolling Solo showcase for Uprising: Curse of the Last Emperor from Nemesis Games. Now, currently on GameFound, Uprising is back for a reprint as well as additional content, a new expansion called Titans of the First Age. I'll have a link to that campaign down in the video description and pinned comment. I'll also put a link to my prior preview of Uprising, which was on Tabletop Simulator. But in this series I'm about to walk through right now, we're going to be covering the physical final version of Uprising up close and personal, starting with the solo setup. I'll take you through all the steps necessary to get the game to the table, and then we're going to jump into some solo gameplay. Now, the first thing you're likely going to do is build out the map. You'll be placing the map in the center of the table. Make sure that the scoring track starts at 0 in the top left-hand corner. You'll also have the Nemesis sideboard shown on the right-hand side, and on the left-hand side, you'll also have an area which will be able to house the referencing of the different chapters and phases you'll be moving through, quests and items. If your game table doesn't allow for space for all of this, and I'm currently playing on a 4x3 table, so it fits no problem, you can go ahead and just take the two sideboards away and just place the components next to the major game board in the center. The first thing we're going to set up is the player area, which is going to have you choose a faction. You're going to take that faction's board as well as whichever hero from the faction you wish to control. Each hero card is double-sided, so you can choose whether you want to have the female or the male as your main leader of your faction. You'll also notice on the boards on the right-hand side, each of them are going to be of varying different types of units per those factions. They fall into specific classes or types of units. However, they have varying abilities and costs across all of them. Now, there's a general side to each of the player boards on the far right, which is going to house your actions area. We'll talk more about this during gameplay. The other thing you're going to want to grab is these 4 home hexes, easy to identify based on the full art on the back. I've gone ahead and chosen the 2 factions I wish to control while playing solo. It's worth mentioning you need to, at a minimum when playing solo, control 2 factions, but you can control up to 4 if you wish. With the factions now chosen, we place both the player boards at the bottom of the game board. The home hex is face down right now for the faction. We will be placing this on the game board once we move to that portion of the setup in a little bit. Let's continue on with the player board setup. Again, choosing whichever side of your hero card you wish to control. Make sure that side is facing up. You'll see attributes for the hero down below, and also grab the standee for it. Now find all the standees for your faction and place them by unit type in each of the columns on the player board. You'll see a picture of them behind it to line them up perfectly, and also you'll see how many of the different types of units right next to the title of those units. And we've got our hero standee as well. And it's worth mentioning that you'll continue to set up the other faction you're controlling if you're playing with 2 factions while playing solo. If you're playing with more, you'll need to set up more of them. Here with Syndra the Witch, we also need to find her feat deck. Same for the other faction off camera. And inside of that feat deck, there will be 2 of them, which will have the start keyword in the middle of the card, letting you know those are the 2 cards that you begin with. The rest are in a shuffled face-down pile. The next step for both factions is to place the 5 havens on the player board, covering the resource production spots. Next, each faction is going to gain 5 salt, represented by blue tokens, 5 plunder, represented by red tokens, and 5 food, with the green tokens. Finally, we're going to grab 8 crystals, red crystals, to represent the action points, and your VP tracker for each faction. And that's going to complete the player setup, at least for one of our factions. I've done the exact same steps to the other faction I'm controlling as well. Here's a look at the player board for the other faction I'll be controlling. You can also see the 2 starting feat cards, as well as the differences in terms of the units and the number of those units even, as each faction is different from each other. And of course, that includes the heroes, but both factions begin with the exact same amount of resources. We've completed the player setup. Now we're going to move to the game board setup. The first thing I want to mention before we start placing hexes out on the game board, it's all based on the number of factions being controlled in play. So when playing solo here, I'm controlling 2 factions. So as I mentioned earlier in the video, you could have up to 4. There are varying setups for the game board depending on whether you're controlling 2 factions, 3 factions, or 4 factions. For this video, we'll focus on the 2, and there's something else to make note of as well when you're first starting out. When compiling counting the hexes in order to build out the game board, you're going to have a number of hexes which are unexplored, which you'll place in a pile. You'll also have unexplored sea towers, and you'll also have the capital tile, which will be in the very middle. You'll also notice when you're thumbing through these the first time, there are some that have the icon with a red skull in it. These are considered advanced components. So once you're used to the gameplay, you'll add these in to add another layer of gameplay elements into the experience at a more advanced level. Definitely recommend when you're starting out to pull these out of the equation. Now, page number 9 inside the rulebook is a very important one, as it goes over the game length, difficulty, as well as that advanced component section I just talked about. And as I'll mention again, I'm stripping out every single one of those red skull icons across every single deck and hex pile I've got in this game. So you can see down here, the difficulty levels are listed in columns, and if you're playing on easy or normal, you'll notice that everything from items down to druids has no advanced items going on whatsoever. But once you get to that nightmare and apocalyptic level, well, things get just a bit crazy. Also, in terms of the game length for this showcase, I'm choosing to play 2 chapters. As you'll see in the top left-hand corner, the full-fledged experience of Uprising is 4 chapters. Looking at the main game board, we're now going to go ahead and place the capital in the center. Next, we're going to take all the unexplored tiles, which aren't sea towers, just the regular unexplored tiles, and place them in a grid pattern as depicted in the rulebook for a 2-faction play. Just like that, all the unexplored tiles have been placed face down, the regular ones. Any ones that you didn't place into play can go back to the game box. Next up, find the unexplored sea towers. You're going to shuffle these together. You're going to be placing one in the top left-hand corner and one in the bottom right-hand corner. The sea towers are now in place, and as you remember when we did the player setup, we had those home hexes for each of the factions. I've got those tiles on the board here. We're going to be placing one way up north and one down south. With the home hexes in place, we're now going to change our attention to the enemies we're going up against. There are 2 of them, the Imperials and the Chaos faction. Now, the Imperials are purple and the Chaos faction is yellow. Now, you'll see a purple capital in the center of the game board. That is the Imperials' capital. There are going to be garrisons placed on the capital as well as in 3 adjacent locations. Within the game of Uprising, garrisons come at a varying number of levels, and at the beginning of the game, you're going to have 3 level 1 garrisons surrounding the capital. The capital itself, however, is going to start at level 3, so we'll be placing 2 more tiers on top of it. Just like that, the Imperials are now set up, so let's shift over to the Chaos faction and place some skeletons and curses on the game board. That's going to do it for the enemy factions. Now let's focus on the player factions, the 2 that I'm controlling. I'll be placing both of my heroes in their respective home hexes. Not only are you going to place your hero on the home hex, you're also going to place the leftmost haven on your track on that home hex as well. This is going to open up production for both of the factions I'm controlling. At this point in the setup, we're now going to be changing our focus to dealing with cards and setting them up. Again, remember, there's going to be those red skull icons across a number of different decks. So if you do not want those advanced components as part of your play, especially at the very beginning, which I highly recommend you take them out until you're more experienced with the game, then you'll go ahead, find them all, and just put them back into the box. Next step is to find the Druid deck and to shuffle those cards into a face-down deck, and they're going to place 1 in each of the 4 corners of the game board. Next up, we're going to place the VP trackers for both the enemy factions as well as the player factions on the 0 space of the VP track. On the 0 position, we have the Chaos faction in yellow, Imperials in purple, and red and white for the player-controlled factions. Next, shuffle the item deck and place it face down on the game board. Then shuffle the quest deck and place it face down on the game board as well. On the Nemesis board, you're going to find shadowed in areas for the decks, whether it be the Legion deck for the Imperials or the Hordes deck for Chaos faction. Let's go ahead and place those shuffled decks now. Now, something to be aware of when creating the Imperial Legion deck and the Chaos Horde deck, which is actually off screen, is you're going to want to check based on the number of controlled player factions. This deck is going to change in size. If you're just controlling 2 factions when playing solo, you're only going to place 5 Imperial Legion cards in this deck and 5 Chaos Horde cards in the other deck. So the Imperial Legion deck as well as the Chaos Horde deck off screen have 5 cards in it only because I'm playing a 2-faction game solo. If I want to control more factions beyond just 2, let's say I was doing 3, then this deck would be 5 plus 1. You simply just add an additional card in for every other faction you're controlling, and that's the same for the Imperial Legion deck as it is for the Chaos Horde deck. Both of them would get an additional 1. Now go ahead and place all Legion and Horde standees and targets next to the decks on the Nemesis board. We're now going to change our focus over to the event cards, setting up per chapter. You'll see 4 different chapters. Place the cards in piles respective to their chapters. And again, as I mentioned earlier in the video, I'm only doing a 2-chapter play. So the event cards for chapter 3 and 4 will be put back in the game box. We're going to go ahead and shuffle chapter 1 cards, shuffle chapter 2 cards separately, and then randomly draw 1 from each deck and place them on the storyboard to the left. With both of the chapters now set up, you'll see just above it there is room for a 3rd chapter, and above that a 4th chapter. Next, find all the dice and place them within easy reach. For now, I'll put them on the Nemesis board. It's a good idea to keep your resource tokens within easy reach as you'll be obtaining them and spending them throughout gameplay. This is a game tray, but inside of the original game box itself, there is a storage solution option. You can use a tray inside of there in order to house your resources if you wish. Within the game box itself, and there's a fantastic organizer inside the game, you can use all of this stuff in order to store the different tokens and have them just to the side of the game. I just wanted to show you this. This won't be in shot, but I do have everything organized inside of it. Things like activation tokens, threat trackers, walls, towers, curses, skeletons, and garrisons can all be housed here. We're down to the final few steps of setup, and it's worth mentioning all remaining components not used in setup or not chosen as part of setup go back to the game box. Things like hexes, Legion and Horde cards, anything else along that line. They're all back in the box, and we're going to give the first player token. Well, it has to be me because I'm playing solo controlling 2 factions. I'm going to place that first player token on Syndra the Witch. And the last thing we're going to do here in terms of the setup steps is to start the game by placing the chapter tracker at the top of the chapter track, which is on the storyboard. Now, I'm personally a huge fan of this because it helps you to remember which phase of the game you're in. I also love the fact you have this entire reference here as to the major steps to go through in every phase of the game. In just a moment, we're going to go over the refresh phase, which you just saw me mark on the chapter track. But before we do that, want to show you there's some awesome reference material inside the game box. You'll notice combat sequence and placing an activation. I've got 1 card houses both pieces of information. I just essentially have both of them showing here so you could see both pieces of information, but you only need 1 of the large cards and 1 of the smaller cards as they're double-sided with all this information on it. Very handy when learning the game. That's going to conclude the setup for Curse of the Last Emperor, but what we're going to do right now is resolve the refresh phase, which is the first phase at the very beginning of the game, just before we wrap up the video. We can skip a large number of these steps, but we need to resolve a couple of them. They're quite easy. The first one is to reveal 1 Druid card. So we have 4 Druid cards around the game board. I'll pick one, we'll flip it face up. Then it says we're going to flip all of our face down cards back to face up. We can skip this at the very beginning of the game. We also aren't going to be regaining action points as we currently still have our 8 action points right now in a pool. We are then going to deal 3 new item cards and discard the old ones. There isn't any old ones to discard, but we are going to be taking 3 cards off the item deck and placing them in the row or in the shop. And then we're going to do the same thing for the quest deck as well, drawing 3 cards from there, and we won't be passing the first player token as this is the very first round to play. So I ended up deciding to flip over the Druid card in the bottom left hand corner. This one says Archery and Clash, so when we're inside of a battle this card is used. Place 1 of your units from any graveyard in any explored hex without enemy units after damage once per combat. We're now going to go to the item deck, drawing 3 cards and placing them in the appropriate area. Here are the 3 cards that I revealed. I have Curse Dice, we have an Eye Patch, and a Healing Potion. And the final thing we need to do to finish off the refresh phase and this video is to pull 3 quests from the quest deck. We have Kaloth Migration, Strike at Dawn, and Druid Sacrifice. And that, my friends, is going to wrap up the setup video for Uprising Curse of the Last Emperor from Nemesis Games. I really hope that this video helps you get the game to the table that much quicker and also gives you a great idea as to what's going on with this one. As we move into the next video in the showcase, we're going to be completing chapter number 1 in its entirety, all full of gameplay. Hope you'll join me for that. And then we'll follow it up with a finale for chapter number 2. Let me know if you own Uprising already. What do you think of the gameplay? I'm assuming if you already own it, you're probably keeping your eyes on the campaign. And for those of you that jumped out of the original campaign or weren't part of it and are now looking at this one a little bit closer, I hope these videos will help you out, and let me know in the comments below whether you're intrigued by what you see as we go through the showcase. Thank you guys so much for watching, and as always, keep on rolling solo.